Welcome back to the channel. Today's story is about a guy named Jim who's been through a rough patch. But just when he least expects it, fate throws him a curveball that changes everything. So let's begin. Jim looked around. How many times had he promised himself to clean up, but those thoughts only came in the morning when he was getting ready for work. In the evening he'd come home with a bottle of vodka, quickly drink it, and pass out. He'd been living at this pace for a year, maybe a little longer, ever since his girlfriend Amanda had left him and moved to the city for a better life. Jim had met Amanda at a disco in the neighboring village. He had never seen her around before. The girls had been all over him because he was a good-looking guy. Plus, he worked at the farming collective and made really good money because he was considered one of the best tractor drivers, operators, and combine harvester operators on the farm. There was no machinery he couldn't handle well. The other guys envied him, saying any metal obeyed Jim. Jim lived alone. His grandma, who had raised him, passed away right after he turned 18, like she had been waiting for that moment. No one expected him to return to the village after getting his training. But he did return, built himself a big house, and worked like a dog, not even looking at girls. He was determined to get on his feet first, so he wouldn't be ashamed to bring a wife home. From childhood, he understood what it meant to be underfed and sleep-deprived because his grandma tried to save on firewood, and the house was freezing cold. Then he saw Amanda and almost lost his mind over her. They got married quickly. Amanda really liked Jim, and she liked even more that she could finally leave her large family where she was the oldest and constantly had to help out. Jim spoiled her rotten, buying her outfits that the village had never seen before, and she quickly got used to the good life, not taking care of the household because it would ruin her hands, it was too hard, and plenty of other excuses. But Jim did everything himself, as long as Amanda was happy. They lived like that for 3 years. Then one fine day, his wife says to him, "Jim, how long are we going to stay stuck in this place? Everyone is developing, moving to the cities while we're just rotting away in this village." Back then, Jim didn't even understand what she meant. "I never said I wanted to move to the city, and you never did either. Where's this coming from all of a sudden?" "Well, I definitely don't want to spend my whole life rotting away in this village. I hope you're not planning on forcing me to do that." Jim raised his eyebrows. "I don't get it. You're from this village yourself. You've lived here your whole life. What's got into you all of a sudden, especially now? We can live like kings here. Just wait, I'll get running water set up. It'll be like living in a city apartment." Amanda stood up and started pacing nervously around the room. "Oh my God, you're so dense. Who cares about water? What about theaters, cafes, culture in the end?" They had a fight that day. Jim lost it first, calling Amanda a country princess, and left. Of course, they made up later but never returned to that conversation. 3 weeks later, when Jim came home from work, Amanda was gone. There was only a note on the table saying she had met someone who understood her, that she would live with him in the city. Amanda also wrote that she had taken the money Jim had been saving in a box, saying it was compensation for wasting her best years on him. From that day on, Jim changed his lifestyle. First, he sold off the whole farm operation, then let the house go. No one had any idea what was going on with him for a while. Then the rumors started spreading. He still went to work but got a couple warnings for being hung over. He didn't respond. He just grabbed 2 half-liter bottles instead of 1 that day when his boss talked to him. Jim sighed and looked around again. Oh, how he wished he could close his eyes to all of this. A couple times he even started cleaning up, but the first time he came across one of Amanda's hair clips, and the second time their wedding album. So he just gave up. He went outside and shivered. It was freezing cold, the kind of cold that stings your nose. Again, he'd have to struggle to get his tractor started. How many times had he argued with his boss about the watchman not heating up the garage? "Excuse me," he jumped. It was still dark outside, and he definitely didn't expect to hear an unfamiliar voice at this hour, especially in his own yard. He turned around sharply. In front of him stood a woman, or maybe a girl with a child huddled behind her. "God, what are you doing out here so early in this cold and with a child?" The female figure shrugged vaguely. "That's just how it happened." Could you tell me if there's anyone around who could give us shelter for a while? Little Johnny is exhausted. We don't have any money, though. Jim tried to make out her face, emaciated, thin, and seemingly very young, although he could be mistaken. Knowing his village folk, he figured they'd be more likely to call the police than let some vagrant stay for free. He glanced quickly at the child huddled against the woman, no more than 5 years old. Then he looked at his watch. No, there's no way he could help them. If Jim was late, everyone would just assume it was because of drinking again. He reached into his pocket and took out his house keys. Here, take these. Go to my place. I'll be back after 6 p.m. It's warm inside. You can fire up the stove if you get cold. There should be some food, too. Well, who knows, really. Just don't go outside or people will ask too many questions. All right, I gotta run, no time. He handed the dumbfounded strangers his keys and hurried down the path towards the garages. For some reason, not a single thought crossed his mind that these were outsiders who could rob him blind. The day flew by quickly. His concern only surfaced in the evening when, as usual, he turned towards the store. He grabbed his customary half-liter bottle, adding some candy this time. He wasn't sure if his lodgers would still be waiting for him, or if they had just warmed up and left. There were lights on in the house, something so unusual and unfamiliar that Jim felt a twinge of awkwardness. He cautiously approached the window and peeked inside. His face fell in disbelief. He could only see part of the room, but it was enough to understand. It was perfectly tidy in there, neat and clean. On the couch under a blanket sat the young woman and the boy, looking at some kind of book. Jim squinted, sighing sadly. There was a time back when he still had hope Amanda would have his child, that he had bought every children's book at the village store. Now they were just collecting dust in stacks by the couch. When his wife left, he had wanted to throw them out but couldn't bring himself to do it. And the smell of food was wafting from the house, a scent he had almost forgotten, making Jim swallow hard. He looked at the bottle in his hands and quickly stuck it in the snow. The young woman jumped up when he entered, blushing. Hello, sorry, Johnny and I did a bit of housekeeping. I made dinner. Jim was taken aback himself. He had no idea the vagabond he had taken pity on that morning would turn out to be such a lovely young woman. I wouldn't say no to dinner. I'm starving, honestly. She rushed to set the table while Jim took off his coat and boots, then went over to the boy. He extended his hand. Jim. The boy smiled shyly and carefully put his little hand in Jim's. Johnny. Nice to meet you, Johnny. Here, kids like sweets, right? Johnny looked questioningly at the woman, who gave a tiny nod. Only then did the boy take the treat. Jim sat down at the table, inhaling the aroma of the hot beef stew, eyes closing in delight. Only after his plate was empty did he look at his guest, who had been waiting for him to speak. That was unreal, so delicious, she smiled. Thanks, it's the least we could do. A shadow crossed her face. I guess we should get going, though. We've already imposed on your hospitality too much. Jim raised his eyebrows in surprise. You in a hurry to get somewhere? No, nowhere to hurry to. An hour later, Sarah, as the young woman was called, emerged from the room where she had put Johnny to bed. She sat at the table while Jim poured them both tea. She thanked him and looked at him with her huge blue eyes. Don't get the wrong idea. We're not some bums or anything. It's just that things turned out wrong, somehow. I used to go to school, but made a big mistake by trusting the wrong guy. Not that I regret it, since I have Johnny. But I had to return to my village, to my mom, who had remarried a younger man at that point. My mom wasn't too happy about me coming back. As I understood later, she was worried about her young husband. Johnny was born. Things settled down more or less, except I could never get a job because Mom made me do all the housework. It's not very pleasant living without your own income. But Vance, my so-called stepfather, would buy me anything I needed. Me, I didn't really need anything. Then Vance decided my mother was too old for him, and that I would make a much better wife. I told him to get lost right away, excuse my language. But somehow my mom found out everything. She decided I was the one to blame, that I had been leading him on, you know. So my own mother and her husband decided they needed to get rid of me to have a complete family with just Johnny. Mom said she'd get my parental rights terminated, no problem. No job, living off them. She could make up whatever story. So Johnny and I ran away. But I'm sure they'll be looking for us. My mom won't let this go so easily. Jim twirled his spoon pensively. Here's what, Sarah. You stay with me for now until we figure something out. I'm hardly ever home anyway, so you won't cramp me at all. And I'll try to find out what's what. Within a week, Jim had even forgotten that he used to drink in the evenings. Now he was always making things with Johnny, reading to him. The house was warm and tidy, and Sarah spoiled them with delicious dinners. It was exactly the life Jim had always dreamed of. Too bad it wasn't really his. One day he was hurrying home from work when a neighbor shouted out to him, "Hey Jim, congratulations in order?" He got spooked. "For what?" "Well, Amanda's back. Been about 2 hours now." Jim went pale. But Sarah and Johnny were there. He took off running for home. Amanda was sitting on the couch posing provocatively. She looked at him with feigned hurt. "Where's the joy at our reunion?" She was so sure of herself and her charms. In 2 strides, Jim crossed over to the couch and yanked her up. "I asked where they are." She cried out in fright. "How should I know? They went somewhere. Probably back home, I don't know." Jim let her go and headed for the door, but then stopped. "And when I get back, I better not see a trace of you here." Amanda stared at him in disbelief, realizing he wasn't joking. But how could this be? She was so sure Jim would break down crying with joy. Jim understood. An hour passed, maybe more. They could have gone far. It had gotten dark outside. Where could they be? God, what punishment was this? He ran towards the garages in the village, praying his boss would be there. He'd take the machinery no matter what, let them arrest him. His boss was there, listened to Jim's frantic story, and nodded towards his SUV. "Here, take this. The off-road capability is better than your tractor. And the speed, of course." "Thanks, Sam, I'll be quick." "Just go already. Give me a call if you need any help. I'll do whatever it takes to get back the person who brought you back to life." Jim spotted them under a tree 5 kilometers from the village. He slammed on the brakes and ran over. "Sarah, what are you doing? Don't you think about yourself? Think about Johnny at least." Sarah was sobbing into his shoulder. "You see, she said she was your wife, that you loved her. And she also said people like us don't deserve to live at all." Sarah said a lot more, but Jim just held Johnny and her close, thinking only about how happy he was that nothing had happened to them. When the flow of tears subsided a bit, Jim stated firmly, "Tomorrow we'll file for custody. I'll keep an eye on you so you don't pull anything stupid again." Sarah didn't object, just hugged him tighter. Johnny smiled and asked, "Does this mean you'll be my dad?" "Looks like it." Johnny studied him for a minute, then hugged them both with his little arms. The day they got married, Sarah's mother and her husband showed up as guests. "Well, hello there. Vance, hurry up and get your things. We're going home. As for this hussy, I'm sure they'll put her where she belongs." Sarah turned pale. Johnny clung to her. Jim stood up. "And just who are you to come barging uninvited into my home?" The woman glared at him. "Us? We're her parents. I'm sure she fed you all kinds of lies and BS, the drunken tramp. Don't believe a word. One more insult towards my wife, and I won't care that you're a woman." She let out a mocking laugh. "Wife? What wife? And this is my son. The adoption process is nearly complete." There was silence for a moment, then the door slammed. It was Sarah's mother's young husband. The mother rushed after him. If you enjoyed this story, please support me by giving it a thumbs up. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, dear friends.